The horrific murder of Benjamin Nathan. Benjamin Nathan was born on December 20th, 1813, to Isaac Mendez Nathan and Sarah Caesars. He had 7 children, including Rosalie Florence, Frederick Washington, and Estelle Nathan. He was an American investor and philanthropist. He joined the New York Stock Exchange in 1836 and became its vice president in 1851. Nathan also served as a director of the Chicago and Northwestern Railway and the Ninth Avenue Street Railway. Additionally, he was a founding member of the Board of Directors for Jews Hospital and served as president of Shereth Israel, an Orthodox Jewish synagogue located at 2 West 70th Street in New York. In July 1870, New York City experienced an oppressive heat wave, prompting the Nathan family to retreat to their country home in Morristown, New Jersey. Benjamin Nathan, a 56-year-old member of a prominent Sephardic Jewish family and a respected figure on the New York Stock Exchange, regularly commuted from New Jersey to his office on Broad Street that summer. Occasionally, he would spend the night at his townhouse on West 23rd Street. On July 28th, he and his 2 sons, Frederick, 26, and Washington, 22, surprised their housekeeper, Mrs. Kelly, by arriving for an overnight stay. The house was undergoing redecorating, resulting in furniture chaos. Since the bed in Mr. Nathan's room had been disassembled, he asked Mrs. Kelly to prepare a temporary bed of mattresses on the floor of the small reception area leading to his office on the 2nd floor, as he had work to finish before sleeping. The 2 sons occupied their rooms on the 3rd floor, while Mrs. Kelly and her son William slept on the 2nd and 4th floors, respectively. Frederick and Washington went out separately that evening. Frederick returned around 11:15 and briefly spoke to his father before heading to bed. Meanwhile, a violent thunderstorm delayed Washington's return until between midnight and 1 a.m. As he passed his father's open door, he noticed the old man asleep inside. The next morning, the 2 sons woke early, intending to accompany their father to the synagogue for prayers, marking the anniversary of his mother's death. At about 6 a.m., Washington went downstairs in his nightshirt to wake his father, but was horrified to find him lying in a pool of blood, with severe wounds to his skull. Blood had splattered across the walls and furniture, and an overturned chair was stained with it. Washington screamed for Frederick, who rushed downstairs, and upon seeing the scene, he cradled their father's head in his arms. Both sons, still in their nightshirts, Frederick's covered in blood, ran outside to call for a policeman. It seemed that Benjamin Nathan had been struck from behind while seated at his writing desk. The initial blow was not fatal, and signs of a struggle were evident. 2 fingers on his left hand were broken as he tried to defend himself. He had sustained at least 15 wounds to his head, with fragments of bone and brain tissue visible in several areas. In Nathan's office, the safe door stood wide open, and $200 to $300 in cash, along with a gold medal recognizing his charitable contributions, were missing. His clothing was also missing a gold watch and 3 diamond studs valued at $700. Despite a thorough search of the house, including floorboards and drain pipes, the stolen items were not recovered. Some of Nathan's head injuries were inflicted by a blunt object, while others were caused by a sharp implement, leading investigators to initially suspect 2 assailants using different weapons. This theory changed when Frederick Nathan discovered a bloodied iron tool, known as a carpenter's dog, on the floor near the front door. The 18-inch iron bar, shaped like a staple with sharpened ends, could have caused both types of injuries, indicating it was the murder weapon. The news of the murder sent shockwaves through New York, blocking traffic on 23rd Street as onlookers flocked to see Nathan's townhouse. The mayor, along with Mr. Nathan's widow, announced a $30,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the murderer, along with a total of $7,000 for the recovery of the stolen items. The New York Stock Exchange opened that day with flags at half-mast, and they added an additional $10,000 to the reward fund. Police Chief John Jordan and Chief Detective James J. Kelso took charge of the investigation. Officer John Mangum was assigned to oversee the crime scene. Having patrolled 23rd Street that night, Officer Mangum reported that he checked the front door of Nathan's house at 1:30 and again at 4:30, as was his routine, and found it locked both times. There were no signs of tampering on the lock. He later discovered that the basement door was unlocked. but there was no indication that anyone had entered through it. It was theorized that the killer might have unlocked it from the inside to create confusion. At 5:10 a.m., John Neas, a newsboy delivering newspapers, noticed the front door was open. He also observed a man dressed as a mason pick up a scrap of paper that resembled a check from the steps and walk away with it. Aside from establishing that the murder likely occurred between Washington Nathan's return home and the newsboy's sighting of the open door at 5:10, none of the evidence helped identify the assailant. What puzzled everyone was how the four occupants of the house that night could have slept through what was evidently a violent struggle. In the eyes of the press and the public, Washington Nathan quickly became the prime suspect in his father's murder. Known for his volatile temperament, he often clashed with Benjamin Nathan over his lifestyle choices, which included drinking, womanizing, and reckless spending. His character made him a likely candidate for the crime, and the media noted that he seemed less emotional than his brother Frederick in the wake of their father's death. However, Washington stood to gain little from his father's passing. Benjamin Nathan had left each of his 8 children $75,000, but Washington's inheritance came with conditions. The money would be held in trust until he either married a woman of the Hebrew faith or turned 25. Even then, his mother would need to confirm that he was living a life of regularity and sobriety for him to access the funds. Despite their disagreements, Washington and his father were not bitter enemies. In fact, Benjamin had recently lent his son $5,000 to help support his business. The inquest into the murder, which lasted nearly a month, seemed as focused on clearing Washington's name as it was on identifying the true killer. He presented a detailed and candid account of his activities on the night of July 28th. He had drinks at the St. James Hotel on Fifth Avenue, read the newspaper at Delmonico's, returned to the St. James for more drinks, and then went to a house on East 14th Street, where he remained until nearly midnight with a prostitute named Clara Dale, who later corroborated his account in court. While the murder undoubtedly occurred after Washington returned home, his earlier actions did not suggest he was a man intent on committing a crime. Frederick Nathan was not seriously considered a suspect in his father's murder. He was devoted to Benjamin and devastated by his death. As a successful broker, he had no need for the inheritance and would not be tempted to kill for it. Mrs. Ann Kelly, the housekeeper, was also ruled out as a suspect. She lacked the physical ability to inflict the severe injuries Benjamin sustained and had nothing to gain from his death, which left her unemployed and homeless. Conversely, William Kelly, Mrs. Kelly's adult son, was viewed as a potential suspect. Living on a small Army pension and his earnings as a handyman, he faced intense questioning during the inquest. He was labeled as having an illegitimate birth, a deserter, a drunk, and associated with criminal elements. However, no charges were brought against him, and the inquest ultimately concluded that Benjamin Nathan was murdered by an unknown assailant. From the outset, police believed the murder was committed by professional burglars. They searched pawn shops for the stolen items and interrogated at least 30 known burglars. But this did not lead to any breakthroughs. The nature of the crime suggested it was not typical of professionals. The value of the stolen goods was low, the violence of the attack was excessive, and Nathan had been away from home most nights that summer, making it puzzling why burglars would target a night when he was present. Additionally, the murder weapon, a carpenter's dog, was uncommon among burglars, adding to the mystery. In March 1871, the theory that Benjamin Nathan's murder was a burglary gained traction when George Ellis, a prisoner at Sing Sing, claimed to know the killer and sought a deal. He alleged that he had committed burglaries with a professional thief named Billy Forrester that summer and mentioned Forrester's intent to rob the Nathan home while the family was away. Forrester became a fugitive but was not apprehended until September 1872. Upon his capture, he hired the law firm of Howe and Hummel, known for their expertise in criminal defense. Since Forrester had spent much of 1870 in a New Orleans prison, the prosecution could not establish his presence in New York during the murder, leading to the dismissal of charges against him. The burglar theory resurfaced in 1873 when John T. Irving, a professional criminal serving time in California, confessed to the Nathan robbery. He was brought to New York, where he provided a written confession implicating himself and several accomplices, including Daniel Kelly, whom he claimed had committed the murder. In exchange for dropping charges related to 2 burglaries in New York worth over $200,000, Irving promised to provide further evidence. However, his story was not credible, and the deal fell through, resulting in his return to prison. Questions about Benjamin's death remain unresolved. Was the killer an intruder or someone from within the household? The murder of the bastard child. Mary Morgan, born in 1788, was a young servant in Prestane, Radnorshire, Wales. At just 16, she worked as a kitchen maid at the Grand Mesloch Castle, home to Walter Wilkins Escoration, a member of Parliament for the county. When she became pregnant, she attempted to hide her condition to retain her position and remain in the castle's servant quarters. On Sunday, September 23, 1804, Mary reported feeling unwell and went to bed. The housekeeper brought her some warm wine, and later that evening, Elizabeth Evelyn, the cook, confronted her about having given birth. Initially, Mary denied it, but eventually confessed to delivering a baby girl, whom she had killed immediately by stabbing her in the neck with a kitchen penknife, nearly decapitating the infant. Elizabeth Evelyn testified that Mary admitted to delivering a child found cut open beneath the bed, with the penknife discovered under the pillows. An inquest held 2 days later resulted in a murder verdict against Mary, stating, Mary Morgan, late of the parish of Glaisbury, a single woman on September 23rd being pregnant, secretly gave birth to a female child, which according to the laws of this kingdom was driven by the devil. She feloniously assaulted the child with a penknife, inflicting a mortal wound. Mary was arrested, but was too ill to be taken to Prestane for trial until October 6th. She remained in prison until April, when she was arraigned before Judge George Hardinge at the Lent Great Sessions for Radnorshire. During her trial on April 11, 1805, she stated, I determined to kill it, poor thing, out of the way, being perfectly sure that I could not provide for it myself. She was convicted and sentenced to death, with execution scheduled for 2 days later, after which her body was to be handed over for dissection. Following a plot to rescue her, she was moved to a more secure cell and frequently visited by local officials. Before her execution, she confessed that the father was a fellow servant who worked as a wagoner at the castle. It was common at the time for executions to occur later in the day to allow local people to attend. Mary was hanged at Gallows Lane in Prestane on Saturday, April 13th, around midday, transported from the jail in a horse-drawn cart while seated on her coffin. Reports suggested that she was barely conscious upon arrival at the gallows and needed support during the preparations. It's likely she was hanged from the cart rather than the more modern new drop style of gallows. Her body was buried later that afternoon in unconsecrated ground in St. Andrew's Churchyard in Prestane and was not sent for dissection as initially directed. Mary's case sparked conspiracy theories. Some claimed that a gentleman present at her trial rushed to London for a reprieve but failed to return in time due to his horse going lame. This was improbable, as traveling to London and back in 2 days by horseback was not feasible in 1805. George Harding noted that Walter Wilkins Jr., Mary's young master, was captivated by her, suggesting a possible sexual relationship, though he was not the father. Speculation arose that either Walter Wilkins or one of the jurors was the child's father, but there is little evidence to support these claims. Mary's assertion that the father was the wagoner seems far more credible.